But you're afraid of being
violent...
called pro-Hamas. That's what this boils down to. Because I bet if we were talking off the record privately, and I said this to you, you would acknowledge that people around the world have a right to resistance by all means necessary.
You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so Ro Khanna went on Dropsite for a video segment talking about his recent detention by Israeli settlers in the West Bank, and then the IDF following up on their detention, holding him up there for like a couple hours, and essentially the experience that he had face-to-face with Israeli apartheid, which he said, left him completely convinced that this is an apartheid state, whereas he was mostly convinced before, and he now says that anyone who's unsure should go to the West Bank and they will see those apartheid conditions, as well as the fact that he's a brown-skinned man, and he said that he's never felt his skin and his skin color as clearly as he did in the West Bank. So he was talking about that experience here on Dropsite, and Jeremy Scahill, the co-founder of Dropsite, really pushed him on the issue of an arms embargo on Israel. So I mentioned this yesterday because Hassan Piker brought it up to Ro Khanna as well. And essentially Ro Khanna has said that he is not in favor of an arms embargo on Israel, that he's in favor of another sort of stepladder of sanctions and actions against Israel, like divestment, stopping of arms sales, etc. You'll hear him talk about it, but he does not support a full arms embargo. So despite the fact that he has done a very good thing generating this news story about himself being occupied there, which is something that kind of builds the pressure against Israel, he's also facing pressure at this moment for not taking a strong enough stance on the arms embargo. So that's something I want to get into a little bit, because I understand people might look at this and say, Ro Khanna's good on this issue, why press him so hard? But I think that that's exactly the right thing to do. Also, he takes it well. This is a heated exchange, but he seems to take it in kind and understand that this is part of what he signs up for. So here first is them talking about the difference in Ro Khanna's idea of what should be done about Israel in terms of our funding of them, him saying that we should not do aid to them, we should not do any arms sales to them, but essentially that we shouldn't stop them from accessing the Iron Dome, whereas Scahill is saying that there's no reason not to support a full arms embargo. So here's them talking about that.
I want to ask you, though, what you think the consequences for Israel should be, not just of these actions, but also for the mass murder of a documented roughly 80,000 people. It's probably much higher than that in Gaza, a significant portion of whom are children. I've heard you talk about sanctioning individuals. I've heard the framing that you and Bernie Sanders offer about offensive weapons or weapons that kill civilians, but I've also heard your defense of Iron Dome. And I want to push you on this because I think a lot of the critique of you from pro-Palestine people and from Palestinians is that the position you're advocating basically amounts to, we need to make sure that the sniper is protected so that he can continue sniping.
I've said no military sales to Israel that are used to kill civilians. I've said no military integration and led the fight to repeal Section 224 and 219, which is Netanyahu's end run, where they would just co-produce the military. I've said we should call it apartheid and recognize the genocide. An arms embargo completely, which I have not supported, would say Israel can't even get or produce from anyone defensive the Iron Dome. And I guess my view is, anyone should be able to protect civilian life, but that's not America supporting it. I do think, though, that there is something that the next administration could do within the first 100 days. Instead of just saying, okay, we're going to talk abstractly about this long peace process, demand the arrest of Yonah Levy and extremist settlers within 100 days. Demand the destruction of every outpost within 100 days. Demand the destruction of illegal settlements within 100 days. Demand a justice for Palestinians and Palestinian people so that they stop getting terrorized within 100 days. That doesn't have to be some dialogue. That needs to be a directive from the American administration saying Israel must do this.
I still don't think this is answering the question. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong here. What you're advocating for, we are talking about not just Netanyahu. Sanders always says Netanyahu and his extremist right-wing government. But if you look at public opinion polling, there is widespread support for open genocidal policies. In fact, Netanyahu is often criticized by his political opponents for not having finished the job in Gaza or in Lebanon or elsewhere. And I want to know why it is that you are stopping on this, because so much of what you're saying, it's one of the clearest recognitions of the issue that you could hear from an American politician. And yet, you still are saying, but the sniper needs to have protection.
It's not the sniper. It's saying that we're not, just so there's no ambiguity on my position, which is also the position of Sanders or AOC or others, as I understand it. It is that we have zero military aid to Israel, that we have no military sales that are used to kill, military weapons that are used to be killing civilians. So that's the drop.
I would argue Iron Dome is used to kill. I would argue Iron Dome is used to kill civilians because it allows the Israelis to have this American backing to operate with impunity.
But I don't think that that's the case if we're stopping all military aid and we're stopping giving them the weapons to kill others, and we're stopping protecting them at the UN, and we're demanding the actions in terms of justice. I don't think that their policies, whether it's Netanyahu or another Israeli government.
Would you say this about apartheid South Africa? I've heard you talk
well,
about
because I think because I
give
do
me another
think,
example where you say it's okay to continue any level of support for an openly genocidal society that has mass murdered 80,000 people, more than 300 media workers, has invaded Lebanon, has bombed Iran, and you're saying, oh, but we need to protect civilians. This isn't about protecting civilians. The greatest threat to their civilians is their policy. And so I don't understand why you have even one qualified shred of support for a sniper mass murderer masquerading as the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, but I'm not saying that the United States should be supporting the funding for Iron Dome, just so we're clear. I'm saying that we shouldn't be restricting Israel from being able to get the Iron Dome or be able to develop the Iron Dome technology. Well,
I stop there. Everything else you're saying makes so much sense. Why do you stop there? It feels to me like you're trying to have it both ways on this issue. So you can say, well, I actually support defending the Israeli civilians. You're not defending Israeli civilians with that policy. You're defending the sniper's ability to keep killing because it won't face the ultimate accountability, which is a total embargo on all support for an apartheid state.
Yeah, I don't think you have to put at risk. You would agree, there are innocent civilians in Israel, right? Including 20% being Arab Israelis. I mean, I just don't think that you have to put their lives at risk to achieve the ends of stopping the apartheid, stopping the occupation.
Yeah, so the passion is warranted here. And essentially, Ro Khanna is just not wanting to go as far as saying Israel should not be able to have access to the Iron Dome because of what they've done and what they're doing. And is still kind of professing this premise that Israel is defending itself in some meaningful or legitimate way with access to the Iron Dome. So the difference between that and what Scahill and Hassan Piker and others are pushing for is to say, no, actually, America needs to be an active force in preventing Israel from getting any arms, because that will not only force Israel to stand down in its occupation, but also will force Israel to dissolve the structures that effectively uphold this apartheid. So while Ro Khanna is making this more sort of step-by-step argument and saying that if we go about individual things like sanctions, stopping arms sales, demanding certain things of the Israeli government, like unwinding of the settlements, etc., which are illegal, mind you. So you have the quote-unquote legitimate parts of Israel that have been more solidified as Israeli land, but then you have these illegal settlements. It's worth noting that most of the land that is considered legitimate Israel was also illegal settlements at one point, and that is the nature of how this project has expanded. So Ro Khanna is speaking very clearly now about the fact that, the violence in this region is used to uphold this sort of apartheid system, and that's exactly what the people of the West Bank are facing. But Scahill's trying to point out to him that by funding the Iron Dome, by allowing Israel to get Iron Dome resources from anywhere, you are allowing them to uphold this same system that murders Palestinians. And so demanding a stop to that, getting an actual stop to that, is going to require more than just saying we are not going to participate in this anymore. And that seems to be more what Ro Khanna is talking about, is like America needs to wash its hands of this. whereas an arms embargo would be a more direct engagement, almost making an actual enemy out of what is supposedly our ally, Israel. So it's a much more confrontational stance. And while Ro Khanna is kind of allergic to that, he's afraid of the political consequences that might come from that, which I'll get to in a second here. It also is naturally the next step in this conversation, given, as I said on the last episode, the mounting tension over this issue is not going to cease. It's only going to get worse from here, meaning that inevitably we're going to arrive at the point where people like Ro Khanna are going to be calling for an arms embargo because the situation's not going to get any better in the meantime. So it doesn't really make sense for him to drag his feet on that when we could actually increase our momentum to a point of actually doing something about this if people like Ro Khanna are taking a more drastic stance on it, because making an enemy out of Israel, actively trying to prevent them from getting arms, rather than just saying we're not going to have anything to do with this, is truthfully the only way that this is going to stop. Because if Israel has some type of back door where they can get weapons from somewhere else, and America makes a deal where we're going to allow that to happen, which is what would happen under the type of premise that Ro Khanna is creating. Like, okay, here, we're going to put all this pressure on you, we're going to cut all this aid and remove ourselves from this situation, but we're not going to stop you from getting arms through this back channel or that back channel. So that's an unacceptable compromise, because ultimately the settler project of Israel will not change under those conditions. So I want to get back to that a little bit, the policy aspect of it, in a second, because there was an interesting tidbit about that at the end. But here is a little bit more about the idea of Palestinian resistance versus Israeli violence against Palestinians, etc., and the sort of double standard that exists there. And even Ro Khanna, one of the best politicians that we have on this particular issue, certainly one of the most active and one of the most front and center, still kind of participates in this weird double standard that exists between Palestinians and Israelis. So here's that.
Do Palestinians have a right to kill Israeli soldiers, Congressman? On October 7th, when they attacked the military bases in the Gaza envelope, did the Qassam brigades and Suraya al-Quds have a right to kill Israeli soldiers? Yes or no? On October 7th, did Palestinians have a right to attack Israeli military bases in the Gaza envelope? Yes or no?
I mean, I think October 7th's attack was a terrorist attack, so I don't justify.
Was it a terrorist attack when the first targets that were hit on the morning of October 7th were multiple military bases? Did Palestinian forces have a right to attack those military bases?
I am not for violence again in any way.
Did Israel have a right to drop a single bomb in Gaza in response to October 7th?
I believe Israel had the right to get people who killed the civilians, but not in the way they went about it, which I've said is genocide. But the Palestinians have a right to justice, which is in the case of the
Do they have a right to armed resistance against Israeli occupation soldiers in uniform? Do they ever have a right to kill an Israeli soldier?
I think if it's a self-defense, if they feel like there's an illegal attack on them by a violent settler or by an Israeli soldier, and that's illegal, in a school or on a civilian, and then of course they should have justice.
But the entire thing is illegal, Representative Khanna. The entire occupation of Gaza. But you're afraid of being called pro-Hamas. That's what this boils down to. Because I bet if we were talking off the record privately, and I said this to you, you would acknowledge that people around the world have a right to resistance by all means necessary.
I've always been for peaceful resistance.
It's a very interesting exchange here. And Scahill's pressing hard about the idea of whether or not Palestinians have the right to resist at all. So he's pointing to very specific instances on October 7th. Not all of the people that were attacked on October 7th were military outposts or military targets. So he's specifically saying that, which is different from saying Hamas has the right to attack civilians, for example. But you can also see that there is a hesitance in Ro Khanna to even say that Palestinians have the right to attack someone who's a soldier. And even the premise of you don't have the right to attack a soldier unless they're actively harming you or attacking you, again, kind of implicitly ignores the very apartheid structure that Ro Khanna is bringing attention to. Because if a soldier is on your land, pointing a gun at you, intimidating you, essentially at what point does violence become legitimate? Only when that soldier is attacking you. But you could argue that the entire act of sanctioning what land you're allowed to be on and where your family is allowed to go, all of that is an act of violence. So what does meaningful resistance look like to that? Ro Khanna would argue peaceful resistance, etc. But I mean, history has shown that peaceful resistance is not the answer to this. And while political resistance, people like Ro Khanna and the general American public moving things in a direction where aid is cut off, that could be the answer. But so far, that has not materialized in anything. And the only thing that has pushed the conversation forward is Palestinians' willingness to resist, forcing people in the American media and political structure to admit that in some cases Palestinians do have the right to resist, or even if you think they don't, Israel unleashing genocide on them is clearly opportunistic in the face of resistance that was inevitable in the first place. So that's the part that we haven't arrived at. People like even Ro Khanna have not arrived at. That the resistance that happened on October 7th, whether it was civilians or military targets, it was inevitable. It was inevitable because of the apartheid conditions. And so the only way to stop the violence in this situation is to disarm the aggressors in the situation, which is Israel. And I'm not going to say that that's going to solve the entire problem, because I don't want to see a situation where it's just open season on any civilians, whether they're Israeli or not. But there's no doubt that the number one thing that increases animosity, hostility, and violence in the region, it is Israeli apartheid. So focus on dismantling that. Direct confrontation with that is the number one priority. And Ro Khanna will come to that eventually. And that's the point of this pressure, is that letting him know that he is one of the only politicians who can push the conversation forward in that way. And as time goes on, he will feel safer in doing so. Unfortunately, there are Palestinians dying every day. So we don't have much time, unfortunately, which is why it's better for politicians to be pressured to have more urgent rhetoric about this. But anyway, back to the last part, and then I'll wrap this up. This is a part where Ryan Grimm brings up something interesting that Rahm Emanuel said and presents that to Ro Khanna. This was an interesting position that Rahm Emanuel took on a recent trip to Israel. So here's that.
While you were there, just real quickly, Rahm Emanuel went to Tel Aviv at the same time that you were there. He had an interesting moment, I thought, where he said the Israeli banking system needed to be sanctioned, and any Israeli corporation needed to be sanctioned if it was at all operating in occupied territory. And his questioner pushed back and said, well, that's the entire Israeli economy. You would be sanctioning the entire banking system and basically every company in Israel. And Rahm Emanuel said, yes, we need to sanction. Would you support a full sanctioning of the Israeli banking system if there are banks that are operating? Yeah.
Yeah, and government officials, and yes.
Then at that point, then they effectively can barely buy anything. They wouldn't be able to buy Iron Dome components if they'd made it indigenously. I suppose domestically they could do it, but
I haven't read the details of Emanuel's speech, but is he calling for broad-based sanctions on all the financial institutions, or sanctions on the financial institutions who lend to settlements?
Yeah, well, so this is interesting because it's one of the more specific policies on the table in terms of how Israel could be directly confronted. It's also an example of how even a simple policy, something that if you take a rose-colored lenses look at Israel and say, we're going to put pressure on the worst aspects of this, we're going to put pressure on the right-wing government, we're going to put pressure on the banks that are lending to the settlements or anything connected to that. And Ryan Grimm is pointing out here something that Rahm Emanuel might not have really thought through when he said this, that essentially a huge portion of the Israeli economy would collapse through that, because these settlements are so intertwined with the actual banking system of Israel that sanctioning any bank doing that type of business would force them all to shut down. So it's an example of how quickly a simple policy like that, simply sanctioning banks participating in illegal settlements, all of a sudden you're pulling the plug on all of those banks and you're putting an enormous amount of pressure on the entire country of Israel. So that's the right position. And the fact that even Rahm Emanuel kind of tripped himself into taking that position shows how the floor is moving on this issue, but also the fact that the closer you get to actually doing something about this, the less it is really a matter of quibbling. You either treat this like an apartheid nation that needs to be toppled and needs to be rearranged, or you try to salvage this settler colonial project somehow, which is just not going to work. And it's possible that some kind of like truce can be made at some point in the future, but The Israeli government is planning for that. They know that eventually Democrats in some form are going to be in control again. They want to make them AIPAC Democrats. The more they fail about that, the more they're going to have to compromise on what it is they're trying to do in the region. And that's why compromise can't really be on the plate for anybody who's trying to push this conversation forward. It has to be a direct confrontation with this apartheid state, because that's the only way that we can turn the page in this century and truly wash our hands of this. It's not going to work to just say we need to get our money out. We need to actively prevent what is happening there from continuing. So good on Ro Khanna for the work he's doing. I do think that, he's moving in the right direction on this, and there's always going to be people who are outflanking the politicians. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but this is an interesting place where Ro Khanna is kind of splitting hairs a little bit, and I don't know, to me it seems untenable. He's taking it because he thinks it's a tenable position, but I don't think so I guess we'll find out.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic, can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.